Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. The world was quiet as I drove to work that morning, but my mind was far from settled. Lately, I'd felt something creeping into my thoughts, something uninvited and unwelcome. My wife, Molly, and I had been married for nearly 10 years. Ours wasn't a marriage filled with grand romantic gestures, but we had built a life together, a comfortable home, 2 kids, and a daily routine that brought some sense of normalcy and fulfillment. But that morning, as I sat behind the wheel, something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Molly had been acting differently. I didn't want to overthink it. After all, everyone went through phases. Molly had always been a dedicated mother and wife, balancing her career as an HR consultant with our family. She'd started going to the gym religiously after work, a new habit she claimed was for her health. I thought it was admirable, honestly. I was a creature of habit myself, and I respected her drive. But lately, I'd noticed changes. Molly was spending more time on her phone, texting late into the night with a small smile as if she held a little world inside her screen that I wasn't a part of. I told myself not to worry. It's just work, I thought, or maybe she's reconnecting with some old friends. But that feeling in my stomach refused to settle. It was only when we went on a long weekend with a group of friends that everything came to a head. We'd rented a beach house, and everyone was in good spirits. The kids were playing in the sand, Molly was laughing with our friends, and for a moment, I felt the suspicion lift. It was just one of those blissful weekends where everything felt right in the world. That is, until I walked in on her, sitting alone on the deck, staring at her phone with a deep, focused look. I hadn't seen her look like that since she was trying to land her current job, intensely focused, slightly nervous. She quickly stashed her phone as soon as I entered, her expression shifting to one of light-hearted surprise. "Oh, hey," she said, putting her phone away like it was nothing. "I was just catching up on some messages." That nagging feeling intensified. I forced a smile, dismissing the thoughts that raced through my mind. "Everything okay?" "Of course, just work stuff," she replied, brushing it off with a laugh. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this was just her being dedicated, committed to her job as she always had been. But my gut wouldn't let me. I decided to file it away, choosing not to ruin the weekend with accusations or questions that might be rooted in nothing more than paranoia. But the following week, back home, things didn't go back to normal. Molly seemed distracted, distant. Our conversations felt rushed and superficial. We weren't sharing those easy, intimate moments that once made the daily grind feel like something special. And the phone, she was always on her phone. My stomach churned with every glance she stole, every text she replied to under the table at dinner. One night, as she was texting away with that small, secret smile, I felt a pang of anger rise in me. But I held it back. After all, what did I really know? A part of me feared confronting her, feared the answer I might get if I pressed her for the truth. But I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. And so, I decided to take a step into the world she was hiding from me. The first thing I did was look at our phone records. Late one night, when she'd already gone to bed, I opened my laptop, logged into our account, and started combing through the numbers she'd been texting. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. Part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything at all, that this was just my mind running wild. But when I found the number, my heart dropped. It was a number she'd texted frequently, sometimes in the middle of the night when I was asleep beside her. The name on the account was a simple one, Nick. A coworker, apparently, someone she'd mentioned in passing but never with much detail. Just, Nick from HR, the guy who'd helped her with a particularly tricky client account a few months back. A wave of nausea hit me as I stared at the records, the messages between them frequent, almost daily, at all hours. My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of it, to find an explanation that didn't involve betrayal. The next few days were a blur. I walked around in a haze, pretending everything was fine. I smiled at Molly, joked with the kids, and went to work, all the while feeling as though a storm was brewing inside me. Each time she picked up her phone, each time she smiled to herself, the storm grew stronger. I was filled with anger and doubt, but I didn't confront her. I needed proof, something that could answer the question burning in my mind. On Saturday morning, while she was in the shower, I took her phone. My hands shook as I opened her messages, scrolling through until I found Nick's name. It was worse than I'd feared. Their conversations weren't explicit, but they were undeniably intimate. Inside jokes, shared secrets, the kind of easy familiarity that used to be ours. She was sharing a part of herself with him that should have been reserved for me. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded, and my vision blurred. I put the phone back where I found it, then walked outside to catch my breath. The crisp morning air did nothing to ease the suffocating tightness in my chest. My mind raced, reliving moments from the past few months, wondering how long this had been going on, how deep her betrayal ran. But I still didn't confront her. I spent the rest of that day in silence, my anger festering, building into something dark and unrecognizable. I thought of our kids, of the life we'd built, of the years we'd spent together. How could she throw it all away for someone else? That night, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, laughing with the kids, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. She had made a choice, and now it was my turn. I resolved to gather everything I needed, to lay the groundwork for what would come next. Molly might think she could hide her secrets, but I was about to make sure she would pay for every lie she'd ever told me. I had never felt such a sense of quiet rage before. It was strange, I thought anger would be loud, uncontrollable. But instead, I felt a deep calm, a cold clarity that frightened me. This wasn't a passing rage. It was something that had settled in my bones, a heavy weight that I knew I wouldn't be able to let go of easily. I went through the next few days in a daze, performing the usual motions of life with Molly, but my mind was working tirelessly, plotting what I would do next. I knew that confronting her outright wouldn't be enough. She'd likely deny it, or worse, give me some half-hearted explanation. I couldn't stomach the thought of her lying to me, to my face, not after what I'd seen. So, I decided to keep collecting evidence, to gather enough to ensure that when I did finally confront her, she'd have no room for excuses or twisted truths. Molly's phone had given me a taste of the truth, but I knew I needed more than a few texts to understand what was going on. I wanted to see it all, the full extent of her betrayal. So, I started tracking her every move. Each night, after she went to bed, I'd wait a few hours and then sneak downstairs to our computer. I installed a tracker on her phone to monitor her location. I hated doing it, the act felt invasive, as if I was betraying her privacy. But the irony didn't escape me. She'd done far worse to me, to our family. If she could take the intimacy and trust we'd built over years and throw it away for this man, then I had no qualms about following her footsteps in the shadows. Within days, the evidence started piling up. The messages between her and Nick were ongoing, only now I saw the full extent of their interactions. I'd look at my phone in the middle of the day, watching her little blue dot moving around the city. Work meeting would be her excuse, but I'd watch as her dots stopped in unfamiliar neighborhoods, at restaurants, at places I knew had nothing to do with her job. I found myself glued to the screen, my anger growing each time she deviated from where she should be. Each outing was another knife in my back, each lie a confirmation of how little she thought of me. I thought back on our years together, trying to remember when it all started to go wrong. The small distance that had grown between us suddenly felt like a canyon. Looking back, I wondered if I'd ignored the signs, chosen not to see the shift that had happened in our relationship. Maybe I'd been blind to it because I didn't want to believe she was capable of this. I'd been a fool, trusting her so completely. The realization hit hard. I'd built our life together on a foundation of trust that had turned out to be nothing more than sand. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the way she turned her back on me so effortlessly. She'd broken our vows, thrown away everything we'd worked for, and for what? A fling? A thrill? I thought about confronting her each night, pacing in the darkness while she slept peacefully beside me. I'd glance at her, the woman I'd once adored, now a stranger sharing my bed. It took every ounce of control I had to hold back. I wanted her to feel the shock, the full force of the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. One Saturday, while Molly was out with friends, I searched her side of the closet and found a shoebox tucked behind her gym bag. Inside, I found souvenirs from places I'd never been with her, matchbooks from bars, little trinkets, receipts from expensive restaurants. I felt a grim satisfaction as I collected everything, placing each item on the bed, imagining how I'd present this all to her. But I reminded myself, patience. In the meantime, I made sure to keep up appearances. I was more attentive to the kids, picking them up from school, planning small outings. I wanted to be the stable one, the constant. They were my focus. Whatever happened next, they would be protected from the ugliness of this mess. They wouldn't be dragged into the chaos that Molly had created. I could see that Molly sensed something different in me. She'd give me those strange looks when she thought I wasn't watching, as if trying to read my mood. I stayed calm, polite, even warm on occasion. I wanted her to feel safe in her lies, comfortable enough to keep going, all the while letting her trap herself deeper. But inside, I was bracing for the storm, planning every move like a game of chess, positioning each piece so that I'd have the upper hand when the time came. Then, one evening, my patience was rewarded. As I checked her messages, I saw that Nick was planning another trip. He lived out of state, but from what I gathered, he'd be flying in for a weekend, probably at some cheap hotel, under the pretense of a work trip. Molly had told me she was going to a conference in another city. She'd even shown me an email with her conference itinerary, a neat little itinerary with hours blocked off for meetings and workshops. I decided then and there that this would be it. This trip would be the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment I'd let her know that her secrets were no longer hidden. As she left for her trip, I feigned nonchalance, even helping her pack. She kissed me goodbye at the door, a quick peck on the cheek, no trace of guilt or regret on her face. I marveled at her audacity, at the ease with which she could lie to me. But I kept my face neutral, wished her a good trip, and watched her drive away. That weekend, I called in a favor from a friend who worked in IT. Together, we set up a remote feed so I could monitor her whereabouts in real time. Every hour, I checked in, and sure enough, she was with him. I saw her dot on the screen, stationary at a cheap motel on the other side of town, and my anger solidified into something cold and unbreakable. By Sunday night, when she came back home, I was ready. She walked in, tired from her conference, setting her bag down with a sigh and giving me a tired smile. It was surreal, seeing her standing there, lying so effortlessly. I could barely look at her, but I forced myself to keep up the pretense. Soon, I told myself. Just a little longer. Molly went to bed early, and I followed shortly after, lying beside her in the darkness, unable to sleep. I could feel the weight of what was coming pressing down on me, like the edge of a cliff I was about to step over. The following morning, I felt a sense of finality as I got up and went through my usual motions. There was something surreal about the routine, making coffee, getting the kids ready for school, all while knowing that everything was about to change. Molly was cheerful, humming a tune while she packed the kids' lunches, as if her weekend of lies had given her some newfound energy. It took everything in me not to expose her right there, in the kitchen, in front of everyone. But that wasn't my style. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of this. As the kids grabbed their bags and bolted out the door, I watched Molly's face. There wasn't a trace of guilt in her expression, not even a hint of regret. It was as if the lie she'd been living had become so natural to her that she didn't even feel the need to hide it. I took a sip of my coffee, my anger simmering beneath the surface. She turned to me with a smile, something in her eyes bright and carefree, like she was living in a world where nothing could touch her. "You okay?" she asked, noticing my silence. I forced a smile, playing my part. "Yeah, just thinking about work." "Long day?" she asked, pouring herself a cup. I nodded, studying her face. How long had it been since I really looked at her? The lines around her eyes were softer, her hair a little longer than she usually kept it. She looked happy, but it wasn't the happiness I'd thought we'd built together. It was something else, something that came from this secret she'd kept hidden away. I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. When she left for work, I went upstairs, pulled out my phone, and opened the file I'd created, every piece of evidence, every message, every location ping, each call she'd made to Nick. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. I'd spent weeks collecting it, making sure it was airtight. There was no way she could deny this, no way she could talk her way out of it. I felt a grim satisfaction as I reviewed it all, one last time. She would finally have to face what she'd done. That evening, I waited for her to come home. She walked in with that same carefree smile, greeting me and the kids as if nothing was wrong. I played my part, helping with dinner, joining in the small talk about school and work. But beneath the surface, I was preparing for what was to come. When the kids went to bed, I closed the door to our bedroom, and we sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at me, a little concerned, sensing that something was off. I couldn't tell if it was genuine or if it was her playing her own role in this sick little theater we'd been living. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. I took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the room before I finally spoke. "I know about Nick." Her face went pale, the carefree smile vanishing in an instant. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the words to respond, but nothing came. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. "How long?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She swallowed, struggling to form a sentence. I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Molly. I know everything." I pulled out my phone and opened the file, scrolling through the messages, the locations, the call logs. "You've been seeing him for months. Every time you told me you were going on a work trip, every time you stayed late at the office, it was him, wasn't it?" Her face contorted, a mixture of guilt and fear as she looked at the evidence in front of her. She finally managed to whisper, "Yes." I felt a surge of anger rise in me, but I kept it under control. "So, you thought you could just lie to me, lie to our family, and get away with it?" She started to cry, tears spilling down her cheeks as she tried to explain. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice clear. "What did you think would happen, Molly? That you could live this double life forever?" She covered her face, her shoulders shaking as she cried. "I was unhappy, I felt trapped. I didn't know how to talk to you about it." "So you thought the solution was to cheat?" I asked, unable to keep the anger out of my voice now. "You thought lying to me, sneaking around with him was the answer?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't want to hurt you. I needed something for myself." "Something for yourself," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "You think you're the only one who's ever felt that way? I've sacrificed for this family too, Molly. I've given everything I have, and I thought you were doing the same. I thought we were in this together." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the floor, and I could see the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly snuffed out by the anger and betrayal I felt. "I want you to leave," I said finally, my voice steady. Her head snapped up, her face twisted with shock. "What?" "I want you to leave. Pack your things and go. I can't do this anymore." She stared at me, her expression crumbling as the reality of what I was saying sank in. "Please, don't do this. I'll do anything, I'll make it right." "You've already done enough, Molly," I said coldly. "You made your choice. Now, you have to live with it." She reached for me, her hand trembling, but I stepped back. Don't try to make this right. You can't undo what you've done." She crumpled to the floor, sobbing, pleading with me to give her another chance. But my mind was made up. I walked out of the room, closing the door behind me, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. Downstairs, I sat in the dark, the silence of the house pressing down on me. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The life I thought I knew was over, the woman I'd loved now a stranger. And yet, I felt a sense of clarity, a freedom I hadn't felt in years. I'd finally taken control of the situation, put an end to the lies. The next morning, Molly was gone. Her things were packed, her car no longer in the driveway. I felt a pang of sadness as I looked around, the house strangely empty without her. But as I glanced at the kids' rooms, their innocent faces still asleep, I knew I'd done the right thing. I was done living in her shadow, done pretending everything was okay. It would be hard. It would be messy. But I was ready for the next chapter. In the weeks after Molly left, life settled into a strange, tense quiet. The kids asked questions, of course. I told them their mother was staying with a friend for a while, needing some time for herself. It was the closest I could get to explaining the situation without shattering their world completely. They missed her, asked when she'd be back, but I was careful not to promise them anything I couldn't keep. At first, I thought I'd be flooded with relief, but I wasn't prepared for the waves of loneliness and loss that hit me in those quiet moments after the kids were asleep and the house felt too big, too empty. I had built this life with her, and despite everything, the absence of her presence felt like a dull ache I couldn't shake. Some nights I'd catch myself staring at old photos or remembering moments we'd shared and feel a pang of something dangerously close to regret. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Molly. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and started reading, bracing myself for another round of apologies and excuses, maybe a plea to come back. Instead, what I read stunned me. "William," the letter began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did was wrong, and I accept that I've lost you and our life together. I'll live with the regret of that every day. But I need you to know that not everything was as it seemed. I kept secrets from you, but not the ones you think. This is hard to explain, but please just hear me out." My heart raced as I read, the anger I'd carried for weeks stirring to life again. What could she possibly have to say that would make any of this better? But as I continued reading, the letter took an unexpected turn. "Do you remember a few years ago when I went for that medical checkup? I told you it was just routine, but it wasn't. I hadn't wanted to worry you at the time, but the doctors found something. It was complicated. They weren't sure exactly what it was, and they told me it might be nothing, but they advised that I monitor it closely. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to disrupt our lives. I was terrified, but I chose to handle it alone, thinking it would just go away." I stopped reading, my hands trembling. I felt a sense of dread creeping into my bones. What was she saying? I'd go back every few months, thinking each time that it would be the last, that they'd tell me it was nothing. But things didn't get better. I started seeing specialists without telling you, hoping I could fix it on my own. I was selfish, I wanted you to be happy. I didn't want to taint the life we'd built with fear and sickness. But eventually, I couldn't avoid the truth. The doctors told me the illness was progressing, and I'd have to make some difficult decisions. I could hardly breathe as I read her words, a strange numbness spreading through me. When I met Nick, I was in a bad place. He wasn't just a coworker, he was someone who understood what I was going through. He'd gone through something similar with a family member, and he became my confidant. He was there for me when I couldn't turn to you. I didn't want to hurt you, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to tell you what was happening. Nick was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who understood the reality I was facing. And I know that looks like a betrayal, but it wasn't what you think. Her words blurred on the page as I struggled to process what I was reading. I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions, the anger warring with an ache I couldn't name. I know you think I left you for him, that I chose him over you. But that's not true. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I was so desperate to feel alive, to feel something other than fear and hopelessness. I clung to Nick because he didn't know me as your wife, as the mother of our kids. He knew me as a person fighting to keep herself whole. I used him, and that's something I'll have to live with. I sat down, the weight of her words crashing over me, my heart pounding as I struggled to make sense of it all. I'm telling you this now because I don't know how much longer I have. The doctors told me there's nothing more they can do. I'm facing the end, William. And as much as I want to beg you to forgive me, I know I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that I love you, that I never stopped loving you, and that I'm sorry for everything I've put you through. The letter ended there, no sign-off, no final goodbye. Just a raw, broken confession that left me reeling. I sat there, staring at the words, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. Over the next few days, I tried to go about life as usual, but her words haunted me. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about her, about us. The anger was still there, but it was tangled up with a deep, painful empathy I hadn't expected to feel. Despite her lies, despite the betrayal, I felt something that resembled understanding. A week later, I got a call from a hospital in another city. Molly had been admitted, her condition critical. They told me she had listed me as her emergency contact. I hadn't spoken to her since I'd read her letter, hadn't reached out or acknowledged her confession. But in that moment, I knew I had to go. When I arrived, she was lying in a hospital bed, looking frail and worn, a shadow of the woman I had once loved. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening in surprise. She tried to speak, but I shook my head, coming to sit beside her. You don't have to say anything, I whispered, taking her hand. I didn't know why I was there, what I was hoping to find, but I knew I couldn't leave her alone. We sat in silence, the years of pain and betrayal hanging between us like a fog. She closed her eyes, a small, sad smile on her lips, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. In those final moments, there were no lies, no secrets. Just two people, broken and flawed, sharing a truth that couldn't be erased. I stayed by her side until the end, holding her hand as her breathing slowed, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost and everything we'd somehow found again. And when she finally let go, I sat there, staring at the woman who had been my life, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. In the end, she'd kept her secrets to protect me, even though it had cost us both more than we could bear. And as I walked out of that hospital, I felt the anger and sadness lifting, leaving something that felt like forgiveness in its place.